the middle of the vast Pacific Ocean lies the tiny coral atoll of Bikini. It is here that Joint Army-Navy Task Force 1 will conduct the tests with the atom bomb. Not since the discovery of gunpowder has the world wondered over the ability of man to create such an agent of destruction. Anchored in the sheltered waters of the Bikini Lagoon below is an array of almost every type of naval vessel used in the past war. Here is the venerable old carrier Saratoga, the battleship Pennsylvania, flagship of World War I. USS Nevada was designated the target ship and strategically placed. Being painted white topside would make her easier to spot from the air. This is the heavy cruiser Pensacola, the heavy cruiser Salt Lake City, and the German heavy cruiser Prince Eugen, the Jap battleship Nagato, the light carrier USS Independence can be seen on the left, the submarine Skate, attack transports, freight and cargo ships, LCIs, LCMs. A sample of almost every type of naval vessel comprises this guinea pig fleet. The decision of the target ships was based on the directive of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. It required ship damage. Of 73 ships were assembled. The densest pattern was within a 1,000-yard radius of the bomb aiming point. Ships within the 500-yard radius were secured by fixed moorings both fore and aft to prevent swinging. These were the heavy cruiser Pensacola, the destroyer Hughes, the Japanese battleship Nagato, the light carrier Independence, the submarine Skate, the concrete oiler YO-160, and the Japanese light cruiser Sakawa. Ships outside the 500-yard radius were anchored free to swing. From the 1,000 circle to the outer extremity of the target area at 4,000 yards, ships were disposed in a spoke-like pattern consisting of LSTs, LCTs, LCIs, 2 rows of transports, and 1 row of destroyers. The heavy ships lying outside the 500-yard circle were the Arkansas, New York, Saratoga, Pennsylvania, and the large German cruiser Prince Eugen. All of the target ships were loaded with ammunition and fuel oil, varying from full wartime loading to 10% of normal. The automatic error is almost incomprehensible to the human mind. In fact, the power of a single bomb was not too well known because there had been but 3 exploded, none at sea. In this 20th century world of atomic power, man is fully aware that he cannot assume an attitude of indifference to this new elemental force that he has discovered and must prepare against what its scientific mind ever known. These specialists, with their strange and complicated scientific instruments, will make hundreds of tests measuring temperatures, pressures, and radioactivity, and other experiments analyzing the effects of the bomb on aircraft, armament, ordnance gear, and other paraphernalia. Tied to the decks of the ships in Bikini Lagoon are samples of mechanical equipment and articles of every type and description that the Army and Navy used during the past war. Airplanes, jeeps, food, clothing, trucks, and armored cars. Everything from canned milk to tanks will be subjected to the blast. Different animals have been placed aboard the ships to substitute for military personnel. Some were shaved in order that the effects of heat and radiation on their skins could be observed and the results applied to the design of protective clothing. Numerous towers have been erected on Bikini Atoll. Within these steel structures will be housed the remotely controlled photographic, electronic, and other scientific instruments that will automatically record the results of the blast. Atop some of these towers, encased in huge lead vaults, cameras have been strategically placed to capture as much detail as possible. Many types of still cameras, as well as 16 and 35 millimeter motion picture cameras, shooting both black and white and color film, have been arranged to photograph the explosion during all of its phases and from every possible angle. Other towers and installations on the island will contain the hundreds of delicate instruments that will record data which will be invaluable for future study. In addition to the photographic equipment on land, special cameras will be used underwater. Meanwhile, on board the carriers at sea, automatic cameras are being installed in the Navy's radio-controlled drones. Photographers in other planes with aerial, still, and motion picture equipment will photograph the blast at various altitudes as they fly around it. Pilots and photographers receive their final instructions here from a veteran naval photographic officer. The atomic explosion will also be observed from other special aircraft. Shortly before Able Day, when the shore personnel had completed its vast and detailed preparations, Vice Admiral Blandy, in command of Joint Army-Navy Task Force 1, makes a last-minute personal tour of inspection among some of the installations for radar and other setups which contain the remotely controlled cameras and television apparatus. While the Navy concentrated its efforts at Bikini, the Manhattan Project's scientists at Kwajalein were busy assembling the atomic bomb, taking special precautions to ensure its safe disposal. Ground crews indoctrinated in the procedure of handling such a weapon. A bombing crew was competitively chosen. Major Swancutt, the pilot. Major Wood, the bombardier. The B-29 Dave's Dream would carry them to the target. While the bomber is poised on the loading ramp, pilots and crews receive their final orders from an Army Air Force officer. This was a photographer's field day, and the lens experts selected for this special assignment are given last-minute instructions. The B-29 and DC-4 photographic planes bristle with cameras of every type and description. 40-inch telephoto lenses mounted on these unusual cameras resemble huge telescopes. All available sights are employed, plus some special setups never before attempted. If some cameras should miss, certainly others will get the pictures. The exposed film is to be forwarded to the Naval Photographic Science Laboratory for processing, classification, and filing, from which center it is available to all authorized agencies of Joint Task Force 1. At last the day arrived for Test Able. It was July 1st in Bikini, but June 30th in this country. With the atom bomb safely secured in her bomb bay, the B-29 Dave's Dream roars down the runway. An anxious moment for the spectators. But the takeoff is without mishap. Everyone on Kwajalein breathes easier on learning of the bomb's departure. The huge bomber proceeds to the Bikini target, escorted by the Air Force photoplanes. Meanwhile, scores of other aircraft are taking their prearranged positions in the sky above the anchored ships. Some Navy fighter planes have still and motion picture cameras aboard. Others are remote-controlled drones with instruments to measure the radioactivity of the air. These will be guided through the cloud column of the explosion. More will circle the area at different altitudes and distances. Everything is in readiness now, and at last the moment has arrived. The bombing plane is nearing the target with its escort of photographic planes. At sea below on one of the ships, Secretary of the Navy Forrestal is among the observers who patient the arrival of the bomb. Sunglasses are worn by some, while others hide their eyes. Position. There's the target. Bomb away.
There it goes. The fourth atomic bomb has been successfully detonated. First you see a blinding flash. Then comes the hemispherically shaped cloud that expands rapidly just behind the initial pressure wave. After the smoke clears, the characteristic mushroom cloud begins to form and shoot skyward. The first phase of the bomb burst produces the effect of an exploding derby hat, where the outside edge of the rim outlines the outermost front of the pressure wave at that instant. The cloudy rounded portion of the hat results from what is known as the cloud chamber effect. ball of fire, growing and rising above the clouds and smoke of the explosion. Although obscured during the first few seconds, the ball of fire is still visibly red hot. The maximum temperature reached at the center of this ball, shortly after detonation, exceeds even the temperature of the sun. The mushroom cloud gains altitude with amazing speed. In less than a minute, it has reached a point 1 mile above the Earth. Although a beautiful sight, this swirling, boiling mushroom cloud is certain death to any living thing which approaches too close to its edge. Radioactive fission particles, which resulted from the explosion, are dispersed throughout the cloud, and the deadly radiation from these particles must be avoided until the cloud is thoroughly diffused in the upper atmosphere. In this test, the Army, Navy, and civilian scientists wanted to find out just how lethal the cloud actually was at various altitudes and various distances from the center. Therefore, under the guidance of the Manhattan Project's Los Alamos laboratories, the Army Air Forces installed specially designed filters on 4 of their B-17 pilotless drone planes so that an airplane could go into the very center of the cloud and bring back samples of the radioactive particles without danger to a human pilot. The Navy carried out a similar program utilizing F-6F drones based on the carrier Shangri-La. Only 1 drone was lost in the entire operation, although it is interesting to note that 1 other drone was temporarily lost for a considerable time after it had entered the smoke column, because it was lifted 6,000 feet in the updraft before it could get through to the other side. As the cloud goes higher and higher, its rate of rise constantly decreases, and gradually the tremendous energy of the cloud begins to spend itself. Before the test, there was much speculation concerning the height to which the cloud would rise. Some predicted it might equal the 60 to 70,000 foot altitude reached by the previous Nagasaki cloud. However, at Bikini, the atomic cloud pushed itself to approximately 40,000 feet in a period of 10 minutes and stopped there. Explanation for failure to go higher lay in 3 facts. First, the atmosphere at Bikini was so wet that a considerable part of the cloud energy was absorbed by the moisture in the air. Second, the bomb was exploded close enough to the surface of the water to permit a certain part of the energy to be transformed into steam by a quenching action. And third, there were no large-scale fires such as those encountered in burning Nagasaki to feed the column after its initial rise. After the blast wave from the atomic explosion has spent itself, a reverse or suction wave is created as the air rushes back to the point of burst to fill the vacuum created there. As this air is heated in the vicinity of the fireball, it mixes and rises with the cloud column. Consequently, more air must keep coming into the center of the column, thus causing the effect you see in these pictures of the ship array, where the air rushing into the center of the cloud column carries with it the smoke of the burning ships. In order to obtain complete photographic records, photo aircraft pursued the cloud and took pictures of it as long as possible while it drifted slowly to the southwest. Gradually, it became diffused to such a degree that the chase had to be abandoned. One thing was certain, however: the dangerous radioactive particles in the cloud had become so widely scattered that no longer was there any danger to the surrounding area. In just a moment, you will see 2 views of the atomic bomb explosion taken from the observer ships approximately 20 miles from Bikini Lagoon. The second view provides another excellent example of the cloud chamber effect, which is produced for a very simple reason. The atmosphere at Bikini was almost saturated on July 1st, and when the pressure wave hit the air, it was compressed and heated. After the pressure front passed, the resultant expansion of the air cooled it below saturation point and caused formation of the expanding fog cloud you have seen in each view of the explosion. mounted atop a 100-foot tower on Bikini Island, over 3 miles from the point of burst. On the water, you can see the shock wave coming toward the camera. Watch those palm trees in the foreground. The next 3 views of the burst were taken by other automatic cameras on top of towers located on other nearby islands in the lagoon. These cameras were started in motion by remote control radio signals emanating from aboard laboratory ships many miles away. You will notice in 2 of the scenes that a timing watch has been placed within view of the camera in order to afford the scientists a means of studying the speed relationships of the various phases of this explosion.
The epicenter of the detonation of the bomb was approximately 650 yards from the USS Nevada. At this point, the transports Gilliam and Carlisle, the destroyers Lamson and Anderson, and the Japanese cruiser Sakawa were sunk. The following ships sustained serious damage: Nevada, Independence, Salt Lake City, Skate, YO-160, LDM number 1, Pensacola, Arkansas, LST-52, Crittenden, and the ARDC. The next ships to be seen were only slightly damaged: Nagato, Banner, Pennsylvania, Skipjack, Apagon, Parch, Butte, Dawson, Prince Eugen, Wilson, Stack, Rhine, Brule, Hughes, and the LCT-874. These were the first pictures taken from surface craft, which made their way into the target area as soon as the danger from radioactivity had passed. The 3 ships visible here are an APA, the Salt Lake City, and the Independence. The smoke from the light carrier Independence is from burning torpedo warheads in the torpedo stowage on the hangar deck. In the foreground, numerous salvage tugs and radiological reconnaissance vessels are taking water samples from the lagoon for testing. We see the Nevada, Nagato, Saratoga, troop transports, freight and cargo ships, and other vessels in the array as the camera sweeps across the target fleet. This ship, the USS Pennsylvania, was about 1,800 yards from the epicenter of the bomb blast. Wreckage was slight and limited to minor superstructure damage. The fire burning amidships was in supply samples stowed on this deck and was not of a serious nature. In the background, a salvage tug is seen fighting a small fire on the heavy cruiser Salt Lake City. This ship, the USS Saratoga, was about 2,600 yards from the epicenter. The only damage sustained was a small fire topside and a minor operating mechanism of one of the airplane elevators. The Prince Eugen was about 1,700 yards from the epicenter. This ship sustained minor topside damage only. This is the USS Pennsylvania again, after the fire had been extinguished. This view shows her starboard side, which was away from the blast, and which sustained topside damage aft. This ship, the Japanese battleship Nagato, was about 850 yards from the epicenter. Damage was limited to topside fixtures and superstructure, which were considerably battered and broken. The epicenter sustained only slight damage topside. Shown here inspecting the damage to the ship is the Secretary of the Navy and high-ranking officers. In the foreground is a shattered mirror which had been placed on the deck along with other equipment to be tested. This troop transport received extensive superstructure damage. The smokestacks, radio and radar antenna and supports, together with various other light topside structures, were broken or buckled. These animals survived the blast, but died later from the effect of radioactivity. This ship, the USS Nevada, was about 650 yards from the epicenter. These pictures were taken from the side nearest the blast and show the superstructure wreckage. The paint on this side was scorched, but did not burn. This view shows a portion of the unarmored deck aft, which was pushed down by the explosion. Aircraft and quartermaster supplies placed on this deck were considerably damaged. The next ship is the concrete oiler YO-160, which was located about 400 yards from the epicenter. The concrete hull was undamaged, but the superstructure was almost completely demolished. This ship, the USS Arkansas, was about 650 yards from the epicenter and sustained extensive damage to topside fixtures and superstructure. Cruiser Salt Lake City was 1,000 yards from the epicenter. Superstructure wreckage was considerable. Both stacks were wrecked, and antenna and other fixtures were bent over or broken. The heavy cruiser Pensacola was located about 450 yards from the epicenter. This ship sustained serious superstructure wreckage. Both stacks were a total wreck, and numerous other topside structures were badly damaged. The submarine Skate was located about 300 yards from the epicenter. The light fixtures, periscopes, and superstructure were demolished, but the pressure hull and conning tower remained intact, and interior machinery was undamaged. The Japanese light cruiser Sakawa was located about 150 yards from the epicenter of the bomb burst. This cruiser was heavily damaged topside, and the hull ruptured aft, causing her to slowly flood. Although the Sakawa was commissioned only 18 months ago, she is considered by the Japanese to be a victory model and is not of modern construction. The hull, for example, was entirely riveted. Her superstructure, aft of amidships and above the main deck, was completely demolished. She capsized to port and sank the day following the bomb burst. This is the light carrier Independence, which was about 600 yards from the epicenter. This ship was severely damaged by the primary blast action of the bomb. The blast struck the Independence on the port side, blew in the light side plating between the hangar and flight decks, and pushed up the center of the flight deck like a rooftop. Both airplane elevators were blown up and overboard. The top of the island was completely blown off. Gun sponsons and guns on the port side were severely damaged. The watertight integrity of the hull remained intact. No fires occurred except among the torpedoes on the hangar deck aft. This class carrier was built on a basic cruiser-type hull. The port side external plating was light blister shell plating and became deeply fluted between longitudinal frames as a result of the bomb burst. Similarly, the hangar deck plating is a light false deck built over the heavier hangar deck. Damage to the starboard side, away from the blast, was less severe. Although damage to some of these ships is impressive, it must be remembered that these experiments are not a contest between bombs and ships, but an earnest effort to determine what changes must be made in the future design and construction of ships, dispersion of bases, tactics and strategy in this new age of atomic power.